Welcome back to Shadow Warefare, the place where hidden spiritual realities are brought into the light. On this channel, we explore the unseen battles that many people experience but rarely understand. Some struggles are not just physical or emotional. Sometimes they are spiritual patterns that seem to follow families from generation to generation. Here we talk about spiritual awareness, breaking destructive cycles, and empowering people with knowledge so they can take control of their lives and their faith. Today's topic is something many people have quietly wondered about, but never fully understood. Why do some people seem to carry the same struggles their parents faced? Why do certain patterns repeat in families again and again, almost like an invisible chain that refuses to break? In today's story, we explore a testimony from someone who claims to have once been deeply involved in dark spiritual practices, but later left that life behind. According to her, there are hidden reasons why some people feel like they are carrying the same curse their mother carried her entire life. But before we go deeper, I want you to pause and think about something. Have you ever noticed patterns in your family that repeat across generations? Maybe it is sickness that seems to affect every woman in the family. Well, maybe it is financial hardship that never seems to end no matter how hard people work. Maybe it is broken relationships, depression, addiction, or constant spiritual oppression. Many people dismiss these patterns as coincidence. But what if there is something deeper happening behind the scenes? The former practitioner, whose story we are discussing today, said that one of the biggest secrets in spiritual warfare is the concept of inherited spiritual battles. She explained that many people assume that once a problem affects their parent, it ends with them. But in her experience, she claimed that certain spiritual attacks are designed to pass from one generation to the next, especially when they are never confronted or broken. She described how in the world she used to be part of, spiritual attackers often targeted entire bloodlines rather than individuals. According to her testimony, if someone in a family became vulnerable through fear, trauma, spiritual ignorance, or harmful practices, that vulnerability could become a doorway that affected future generations. She said that many people think curses are always dramatic, like something from a horror movie. But in reality, the patterns were often subtle. They appeared as cycles that quietly repeated across decades. For example, she described families where every woman struggled with the same illness, families where marriages consistently collapsed after a few years, families where financial breakthroughs always seemed to slip away at the last moment. According to her, these patterns were sometimes deliberately created. She claimed that practitioners of dark spiritual rituals sometimes tried to attach long-term misfortune to a family line, so the effects would continue for generations. But she also made something very clear. Not every repeating problem in life is the result of curse. Many struggles come from normal life circumstances, choices, health issues, or social challenges. However, she said that in the world she once belonged to, they specifically targeted families where people were unaware of spiritual protection. She said that ignorance was often the biggest weapon used against people. If someone does not believe spiritual attacks are possible, they rarely take steps to protect themselves spiritually. In her words, the easiest person to attack is the one who believes the attack cannot exist. One of the most disturbing things she revealed was how family patterns can sometimes be reinforced by repeated behaviors. She said that sometimes a curse does not even need constant reinforcement, because family members unknowingly continue the same actions that originally opened the door. For example, if a parent lived with constant fear, bitterness, or destructive habits, Those behaviors often shaped the environment children grew up in. Over time, the children adopted similar emotional patterns, which continued the cycle. She explained that this is why some people feel like they are reliving the same life story their parents experienced. It is not always because of destiny or fate. Sometimes it is because spiritual and emotional patterns were never broken. Another thing she claimed shocked many people when she began sharing her testimony. She said that some spiritual attacks were intentionally placed on specific family roles, especially mothers. According to her, in certain rituals, practitioners believed that attacking the emotional and spiritual health of a mother could indirectly influence the entire household and future generations. She described how, in many cases, the mother would struggle with unexplained sadness, constant exhaustion, or spiritual heaviness that never seemed to go away. Over time, this emotional weight affected the children growing up around her. Those children then carried the same emotional burdens into adulthood without fully understanding why. She said that when she began leaving that world and started speaking openly about what she had seen, many people contacted her with stories that sounded almost identical. Women described experiencing the same illness their mother suffered from. Men described financial struggles identical to what their fathers experienced. Others spoke about repeated family tragedies that seemed almost predictable. The former practitioner said that the moment many people realized the pattern was when they compared their lives with those of their parents and grandparents. Suddenly the similarities were impossible to ignore, but she also emphasized something important. She said that patterns are not permanent chains. According to her, once someone becomes aware of a cycle, that awareness itself becomes the first step toward breaking it. She explained that many spiritual attacks rely heavily on secrecy and silence. When people finally recognize a pattern and start confronting it spiritually, emotionally, and practically, the cycle begins to weaken. In her words, darkness survives best where people never question what is happening. Another surprising thing she shared was that some generational struggles were not originally caused by curses at all, but by unresolved trauma that traveled through families. For example, if a grandmother experienced deep emotional trauma and never healed from it, that trauma could shape the way she raised her children. Those children might grow up carrying emotional wounds they never understood. When they became parents themselves, they sometimes unintentionally passed the same emotional patterns to their own children. Over time, the result looked almost identical to a generational curse, even though it began as psychological pain rather than spiritual attack. This is why she encouraged people not to jump to extreme conclusions, but instead to carefully examine patterns in their families with honesty and wisdom. She believed that real spiritual freedom comes from understanding the root of a problem rather than simply fearing it. She also shared a powerful moment that changed her life forever. One day, she met a woman who had spent decades believing she was cursed because every woman in her family had experienced the same sickness. The woman told her that her mother died from it, her grandmother died from it, and doctors had recently diagnosed her with the same condition. For years, the woman believed she was doomed to repeat the same fate. But after seeking medical treatment, emotional healing, and spiritual support, she began recovering in ways doctors had not expected. The former practitioner said that moment showed her something important. Sometimes people believe they are trapped in a curse, when in reality they are facing a challenge that can be overcome with knowledge, faith, and support. That realization became one of the reasons she decided to publicly share what she knew about spiritual warfare. She said the most powerful weapon people have is awareness. because once someone recognizes a destructive pattern, they can begin taking steps to change it. And when one person in a family breaks a cycle, the impact often spreads to future generations. Instead of passing down fear, pain, and hardship, they begin passing down strength, wisdom, and resilience. She described it like breaking a chain that had been quietly tightening around a family for decades. Once the chain breaks, the next generation is finally free to walk a different path. And according to her testimony, that moment of freedom often begins with one simple decision. The decision to stop accepting destructive patterns as unavoidable destiny. Because the moment someone begins asking questions, seeking truth, and strengthening their spiritual life, the power of hidden attacks begins to fade. She said that is why awareness is feared by those who rely on secrecy. Because once people understand what might be happening behind the scenes, they stop living in silent confusion. They start fighting back with knowledge, faith, and courage. And sometimes that single change is enough to transform the future of an entire family.